What if I told you that India's rise on the global stage is making some powerful countries nervous? Yes, while India is earning global respect, some nations are quietly seeing it as a growing threat. Welcome to our channel, where we uncover the truths behind global politics and power shifts. In today's video, we'll explore the top 10 countries that view India not as a friend, but as a global threat. Whether it's due to India's rising economy, military strength, or strategic alliances, these nations see India as a challenge to their influence. Let's dive into the list and understand why these countries fear India's rise in 2025. 10. China. China views India as a strategic competitor in Asia. Both countries are nuclear powers with a history of border clashes, most notably in Doklam and Ladakh. India's growing military strength, naval presence in the Indian Ocean, and alliance with Western nations like the US through Quad challenge China's ambitions for dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. India's increasing role in global supply chains and its tech and space advancements also threaten China's economic and technological supremacy. Furthermore, India's strong democracy contrasts sharply with China's authoritarian model, positioning India as an ideological rival on the world stage. Beijing sees India's rise not just as regional competition but as a major roadblock to its long-term geopolitical plans. 9. Pakistan. Pakistan has long considered India a threat due to their historical rivalry, especially over Kashmir. The two nations have fought multiple wars, and border skirmishes continue. Pakistan is wary of India's massive military budget, global partnerships, and growing influence at international forums like the UN. New Delhi's defense ties with Israel, the US, and Russia are alarming for Islamabad. Additionally, Pakistan views India's role in Afghanistan and its efforts to isolate Pakistan diplomatically as existential threats. India's economic rise, space program, and digital innovation highlight the stark contrast between the two neighbors, fueling insecurities in Pakistan's political and military establishment. They believe India could become a dominant force that overshadows Pakistan in every sphere. 8. Turkey. Turkey, under Erdogan, has taken strong pro-Pakistan stances, particularly on Kashmir, criticizing India at international forums. India's growing alliances with Gulf states, Israel, and the West challenge Turkey's ambitions to lead the Islamic world. Turkey also sees India's influence in Central Asia and its ties with Greece and Armenia as problematic. Ankara views India's growing soft power, through Bollywood, yoga, and diplomacy, as competition in shaping global narratives. India's refusal to accept external interference on its internal issues contrasts with Turkey's ideological activism. Turkey perceives India's rise as a barrier to its pan-Islamic agenda and increasing role in global diplomacy, especially when India gains favor in Muslim-majority countries that once aligned with Turkey. 7. Malaysia. Malaysia has been vocal in criticizing India's domestic policies, especially regarding Kashmir and the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA. Under former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, India was labeled as anti-Muslim, straining bilateral ties. Although relations have slightly improved, sections of Malaysia's political elite still view India's nationalist policies as threatening to Muslim solidarity. Additionally, India's growing defense cooperation with Southeast Asian countries and its assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific raises concerns about Indian hegemony. Malaysia fears being sidelined in ASEAN if India increases its influence in regional trade and security. For some in Malaysia, India's assertiveness appears as neo-imperialism rather than peaceful rise. 6. Indonesia. Although India and Indonesia share cultural and economic ties, some Indonesian nationalist and religious groups perceive India's treatment of its Muslim population as alarming. India's closeness with the West, particularly its naval cooperation with the US, is seen by some Indonesians as part of a larger strategy to dominate the Indo-Pacific. Additionally, India's Look East and Act East policies aim to increase its influence in Southeast Asia, directly overlapping with Indonesia's regional ambitions. The growing Indian diaspora, digital expansion, and tech startups entering Southeast Asia challenge local industries. These factors make some segments in Indonesia wary of India becoming too dominant in the region, culturally and economically. 5. Iran. Iran and India once enjoyed strong ties, but recent developments have strained relations. India's growing alignment with the US and Israel is viewed as a betrayal by Iran, especially since India reduced oil imports under American sanctions. Iran also disapproves of India's ties with Saudi Arabia and UAE, its regional rivals. Tehran sees India's silence or neutrality on West Asian conflicts as strategic opportunism. Iran is also skeptical of India's role in Afghanistan post-US withdrawal and its naval ambitions in the Strait of Hormuz. While not an outright enemy, Iran views India's rise as potentially destabilizing, especially if it sides more openly with Iran's adversaries in the Middle East. 4. Qatar. Qatar has occasionally criticized India, especially over perceived mistreatment of Muslims and controversial remarks by Indian political figures. The diplomatic fallout after Prophet Muhammad-related comments in India caused significant tension. Qatar sees India's domestic politics as increasingly Islamophobic, threatening its image in the Muslim world. Furthermore, India's growing ties with UAE and Saudi Arabia, the regional rivals of Qatar, are viewed with suspicion. While trade and energy relations remain strong, Qatar is cautious of India's growing soft power and influence among Gulf countries. Some in Qatar believe India is undermining its religious and geopolitical clout in the Islamic world. 3. Afghanistan. The Taliban regime in Afghanistan views India with deep suspicion. India supported the previous Afghan government and invested billions in infrastructure projects, including the parliament building. The Taliban believes India's influence threatens its Islamic rule and aligns with Western interests. India has also maintained close ties with anti-Taliban groups like the Northern Alliance. While India provides humanitarian aid, the Taliban regime sees it as a political maneuver. The regime is also closely tied to Pakistan, which views India's involvement in Afghanistan as a strategic threat. Thus, the Taliban sees India not as a partner but as a rival working against its ideological and political interests. 2. North Korea. North Korea sees India's global alignment as a threat, especially given India's ties with the US, South Korea, and Japan. India has repeatedly condemned North Korea's missile tests and nuclear programs at the United Nations. Additionally, India supports a denuclearized Korean peninsula, aligning itself with Pyongyang's enemies. India's advancements in space and missile defense are watched closely by North Korea, which views such developments as part of a larger anti-North Korean bloc. While there's no direct conflict, North Korea's authoritarian regime dislikes India's democratic model and strategic partnerships that challenge rogue states and nuclear proliferation. 1. Russia. While historically allies, recent geopolitical shifts have led Russia to view India with mixed feelings. India's growing ties with the US, Quad, and NATO-leaning policies are seen as potential threats to Russia's Eurasian ambitions. India has cut back on military dependency on Russian arms, diversifying with Western suppliers. Moscow is also unhappy about India's stance on Ukraine, which it sees as too neutral. Although cooperation continues in energy and defense, Russia is increasingly leaning toward China and Pakistan. Russia fears India might shift completely into the Western camp, threatening the traditional strategic balance Moscow relied on during the Cold War era.